Okay, we are part two, Sabbatai Tzvi, the man, the myth, and the impact, part two. So here we come to sort of the next evolution of the story. And so when we last left our hero, um, he was being kicked out of many of the major communities of the Mediterranean, the Ottoman Mediterranean. Remember, he had started um, in Izmir, which is also known as Smyrna, and he had gone to Saloniki, and Saloniki also threw him out, and um, he had been in Jerusalem, and so we went through sort of his messianic revelations, and he's really not making any kind of impact. He's seen in a lot of these communities as sort of a marginal figure, a bit of someone who is maybe a little bit uh, um, suffering from mental illness, so perhaps they wouldn't necessarily use exactly those terms. But Shabtai is now in Jerusalem, and in Jerusalem, he does a lot of these. He goes through some of these strange moments, and they flog him, and he ends up actually in the house of um, he goes back and forth between the house of the the Chelbi of Egypt, which is essentially the head of the Egyptian Jewish community. And the Egyptian Jewish community is a very top-down community. Actually, I'm on the wrong slide. You'll forgive me. Um, there we go. Sorry. So it's a very top-down community. He's over here in Cairo, and he is around the table of a very important this very important Jew, Rabbi. His name is Raphael Yosef, and he is the Nagid. He is the Chelbi of Egypt, of this Jewish community, which essentially means he has the right to tax people, and he is the one who sort of lays down the law in Egypt. Egypt is a very authoritarian kind of place. And because this person is an extremely wealthy man, he also has around his table a number of very important people. He's got Rabbi Shmuel Ganor, who's sort of a resident Kabbalist. He has at certain points, he has Rabbi Shmuel Vital, which is the son of Rabbi Chaim Vital, who has the manuscripts, the secret manuscripts of his father that were never supposed to be um, published. And what happens now is that the Turks start to tax Jerusalem. There are certain problems, financial problems in Jerusalem. And Shabtai is sent to Cairo, in a sense, back to the home of Raphael Yosef, because Shabtai has access to him and he has access to funds. And now Shabtai Tzvi he's going to represent the Jewish community and he's going to need to raise money. And he does a good job there, actually. We learned that he raises $3,000 to $4,000, 3 to 4,000. Um, um, trying to remember what the currency here, I have it in my notes. They are called, I think, Leontaler. I think is a German kind of currency, but it's worth a lot, and it's a good sum to bring back to Jerusalem. But there are two things that happen to him while he is in Cairo that are going to be extremely important to our story. The first is that he is going to learn of a woman who wants to marry him. And the story of this woman is really actually quite profound. Um, she is the picture on the right, by the way, is a picture of the Khmelnytsky massacres, and she is a survivor of the Khmelnytsky massacres. And there are so many different accounts of her, from these miraculous accounts of where she was really a servant girl in a non-Jewish family, and she goes to a cemetery, and in the cemetery they give her different clothes, and she discovers who she is. She has this prophetic vision. She needs to marry Shabbatai Tzvi. She writes to Sabbatai Tzvi. She's heard of him. She says she needs to marry him, that she's going to be the wife of the Messiah. This is um, a very, very sort of profound incident, because the supporters of Sabbatai Tzvi are going to talk about her in all sorts of miraculous terms, that she had this prophecy. She was going to marry this individual, Sabbatai Tzvi. The detractors say, what kind of woman is this? That she is, um, unfortunately, and this is part of the fabric of this world. The Khmelnytsky massacres, which are going to take place in 1648, 1649, produced many victims. There were many, many rape victims. That's without question. The Cossacks raped many, many Jews. And if you didn't fall into the hands of the Cossacks, you fell into the hands of the Tatars, right? And the Tatars would capture women. And the assumption is one of the assumptions of Jewish law. I don't think it's a bad, realistic assumption. I've never been in captivity, but that if you are the captor of a woman, that woman can almost certainly be thought of as having been violated and abused by her captors. So this woman, Sarah Ashkenazi, is not going to be considered a virgin, certainly by the detractors. They're going to say that here Shabtai is marrying this woman who is unchaste. In fact, there were even some letters by some of the detractors that said that how did she support herself in Livorno? Livorno is a very wealthy Sephardic city. They didn't let Ashkenazim in, I guess, except as sort of servants. Maybe she was a servant there. The charge is there that she supported herself by harlotry, that she was a professional prostitute. So Sarah Ashkenazi becomes one of those very clear political footballs, one of those subjects of argument between the supporters of Sabbatai Tzvi who venerate her the and the critics who are going to say that she was no more than a whore. Now, of course, Sabbatai Tzvi, in his classic um, way of understanding it, he takes the the this inspiration from the first pages of Hosea. This is the second verse, first chapter of Hosea. Tchilat Devar Hashem b'Hosea. This is the first thing God says to Hosea. Vayomer Hashem el Hosea, Lech kach lecha eshet znunim. Go take for yourself a woman of harlotry, prostitute. Vayalde znunim, ki zonah tizna haaretz me'acharei Hashem. Go, he says, get yourself a wife of whoredom and children of whoredom, for the land will stray from following God. Now, Hosea is a much more complicated situation. The verse in Hosea is about perhaps a parable. Maybe it's not real. The commentators have a field day. Was Hosea really supposed to marry a prostitute? Was this just a metaphor? But Shabbatai is going to see this as part of his sort of his tikkun, how he is going to revive things. And there's a according to his supporters, again, there's a big spectacle that is produced where he demonstrates that she had dam betulim, right? She had virginal blood. Tikkun, by the way, sorry, tikkun means a repair. To take something broken, something that would be tainted with evil, with what the Kabbalists would call the klipa, the shells of the breaking of the vessel, and he's going to fix it. So how does he but there's also this big demonstration of the fact that here she was accused of being a harlot, and she is in fact a she's in fact a virgin. Okay. And this, by the way, is um, in this, if you recall from the first two marriages of Shabtai Tzvi, he wasn't able to consummate the marriage. And this marriage, in fact, he was. Again, the supporters of Sabbatai Tzvi, who are very sort of wrapped up in all these sort of prophetic ideas and these mystical visions, that Sabbatai knew that this was his bashert. He learned of it from the letters, etc. There was some visions. People sort of had this feeling, right? And you'll see throughout this story there's a sense of prophecy that sort of obtains in the story of Sabbatai Tzvi, which is almost is there's no other storyline in the Jewish world that has this much prophetic energy in it. Now, Shabtai, I guess he realizes he's in a good situation, and he wants to get rid of his melancholy. He wants to get rid of his difficult psychological state, and the depression, the swings between the manic and the depressive are too much for him, and he decides that he's going to use what's called practical Kabbalah. Practical Kabbalah is the Kabbalah that you use to affect real change in the world. It's a very controversial subject. This, by the way, is a text of Practical Kabbalah by Rabbi Chaim Vital. Uh, Sometimes it's used for certain kinds of cures. Amulets were often written in Practical Kabbalah. This will uh, feature very heavily in the story much, much later when we get to Sabbatiniism and Rabbi Yonatan Eibschitz and Rabbi Yaakov Emden, but we're very far away from that. And so Sabbatai Tzvi tries to use some form of practical Kabbalah to exorcise these demons, these swings from him. And he is now there. He's again. This, by the way, is a picture of the old Jewish community of Cairo. So this is where he is. He's in Cairo. He's newly married. He's trying to get rid of his demons, and people start to hear of a someone who does tikkunim. He does fixing of the soul. And this is Nathan of Gaza. Now, Nathan of Gaza is a very, very brilliant student. He is a brilliant student of halacha. He is a brilliant student of Talmud. He's a brilliant student of Kabbalah. And he, um, he may have known Shabbatai Tzvi by reputation for because Shabbatai was in Jerusalem, and from the reports we have, he was a good-looking person. He had a very positive countenance. He was known to have a very good voice. He would go and do some very unique, pious things. He would go wander off um, and visit the graves of tzaddikim. And so Shabbatai was sort of known to him. This might become important as we move forward in the story. But Nathan of Gaza, a brilliant student, he had memorized maybe half the Talmud, maybe even more. Uh, to appreciate that that makes you in the top half a percent, 2%, uh, 0.1%, some very, very high, high echelon of Torah students. He is the best of all students. And what he does is, now that he has understood the Kabbalah, he's read the works of the Ari, of Rabbi Isaac Luria, he does something that the Ari does as well. The Ari used to look at someone and say, why are you having this problem? Well, because you your soul is really the soul of this person 2 generations ago, and that person was guilty of being a philanderer. That person didn't pay his debts, and so therefore you're being impoverished because of that. But if you want to get rid of this, then you have to do some fast. Maybe you have to undertake a lot of tzedakah. Maybe you have to undertake whipping. There were all sorts of different things. Now, Nathan of Gaza had a lot of credibility here because Nathan of Gaza was also fasting himself. He was also engaging in these penitential actions. He would also ask people to flog him. This is not something which is normally happens, but this is something which the Kabbalists did. And he was someone who was very devout and um, very serious about everything. And people would flock to him to get various issues resolved. They were having problems, whether it was family problems, financial problems, health problems. Nathan of Gaza was going to give you a spiritual approach to this. If you recall, by the way, we told a story about the Arizal that he looked at one of his students and he said, you have someone else's money in your pocket. And this person went back and looked over his ledgers and gathered all of his weavers together. And he realized there was one woman who was a weaver who he wasn't paying well enough. And then he raised her wages. He went back to the Ari, and the Ari said, I don't see any more sin on you. And so this kind of a thing, something which goes back to the Ari. What does someone achieve by being flogged? Well, most simply, what would someone achieve by being flogged is that if, let's say, the sin of the previous episode of your neshama was really needed to be flogged by a rabbinical court, so this could take its place, right? Maybe you need to experience certain kinds of pain in order to gain kapara, to gain atonement for the sin. I don't pretend to be an expert on this, but what I think is important to understand here is Nathan of Gaza is understood to be someone who is very good at fixing people's souls. And Shabbatai Tzvi felt that he was someone with a broken soul. And so maybe his exorcism wasn't really working as well as he thought it would. And so he needs to go to Nathan of Gaza to get his soul fixed. Um, and there's a lot to this story. Now, remember, the sponsor of Nathan of Gaza sorry, the sponsor of Shabbatai Tzvi was this Rabbi Yosef Raphael, right? The head of the Egyptian Jewish community. And so this Yosef Raphael sends his court Kabbalist to go check out Nathan of Gaza and see, is this guy for real? In fact, we believe that Yosef Raphael, a very wealthy person, who probably had to send people on correspondence runs to visit Israel all the time, had at least three different people, if not more, check out Nathan of Gaza, and all of them said that Nathan of Gaza was the real deal, that it was it was true, it was worth it for this man Shabbatai Tzvi, who everybody seemed to love, but also understand was troubled, and they sent him to go and to cure Shabbatai Tzvi. Um, okay, just um, okay. Okay, now Nathan of Gaza is really the brilliant theologian behind the success of Sabbateanism, right? He was a past master in understanding of ancient wisdom and its uses in the Jewish context. He wielded a wide spectrum of tools for attaching his ideas to Jewish traditions, reputed to date from the greatest antiquity, all in the service of Shabbatai Tzvi's messianic mission. So this is a scholar who wrote a book called Messianic Prophets, has some very interesting ideas in it. But basically, the point is that without Nathan of Gaza, Shabbatai Tzvi does not get off the ground. And Nathan of Gaza was a both brilliant and pious person, and he was also very driven. And Nathan of Gaza, before he's even met Shabbatai Tzvi, Nathan of Gaza wants to have prophecy. So, um, so Nathan of Gaza, um, ah, okay. This is Nathan of Gaza's quote from a book which is called The Visions of Abraham. His real name was Abraham Natan Ashkenazi. So Abraham Natan ben Mordechai Ashkenazi. So his book is The Visions of Abraham. This is maybe his treatise that he writes later on, which describes this particular event, where he's going to fast the entire week before Purim, and then he's going to experience Purim. And of course, Purim, you have to eat and drink. And then the next day, he has sort of this day-long prophecy. Now, he's someone who lived a very ascetic life. He fasted a lot. He ate very little, even when he did eat. And he's understood to be, and he has these often has these midnight prayer sessions reciting Tehillim. He's a very, very devout person. And you can see that from his words. This is what he writes in his vision of Avraham. I beheld the Merkava chariot. I saw visions of God all day long and night, and I was vouchsafed true prophecy like any other prophet. As the voice spoke to me and began with the words, Thus speaks the Lord. And with utmost clarity, my heart perceived toward whom my prophecy was directed, that is, towards Shabbatai Tzvi. Even as Maimonides has stated that the prophets perceived in their hearts the correct interpretation of their prophecy, so they could not doubt its meaning. Until this day, I, I never yet had so great a vision, but it remained hidden in my heart until the Redeemer revealed himself in Gaza and proclaimed himself the Messiah. Only then did the angel permit me to proclaim what I had seen. I recognized that he was the true Messiah by the signs which Luria had taught. There's a lot in this. I'm going to unpack a little bit of it. First of all, he says, I had this prophetic vision and I knew it was true. And he cites Maimonides, and he cites this section of Maimonides, Maimonides Yisodei Torah 7:3. Hatvarim shemodiim lenavi b'mareh hanvuah, that which is told to the prophet in a in a in a prophetic vision, derech mashal, through a parable. Modin lo miyad yechakek b'pipron mashal. Together with the vision, he gets the solution to the vision. Right? Think Joseph. Right? Joseph, hears about these dreams. He knows exactly what they mean. Rambam is going to use another example first. V'yedamahu, he's going to know exactly what this is all talking about. Kemo asulam shera Yaakov Avinu, just like the the ladder of Jacob, when he saw all these different nations going up and down, he understood it referred to a certain vision of the change of empires over the course of history, right? So Rambam is going to say that prophets know this when they get the prophecy. And Nathan's saying, just like those other prophets who understood the prophecy when they got it, I got this prophecy from God and I understood it. And then the other piece he says, what does he see in this? He saw the chariot, and on the chariot, what does he see on the chariot? But the face of Sabbatai Tzvi. Now I did something a little bit blasphemous here. I took the vision of Jacob from an illuminated Bible, and I put in the vision of Sabbatai Tzvi. So he sees Sabbatai Tzvi on the chariot. Now, the reason this is a scandalous manipulation of an image is because, according to tradition, it is Yaakov whose image or whose name is on God's chariot, representing the totality of Israel. And here, Nathan is saying, okay, I saw God's chariot. I engaged in this intense prophecy. And what did I see? I saw Shabbatai Tzvi on this chariot. Now, and the third piece of this particular um, prophecy is I was not allowed to reveal it. This has to stay secret until such time as the as Shabbatai Tzvi comes to me or I have a sign to reveal it. Now, Nathan, for the rest of his life, maintained that this was his only truly 100% prophetic moment, but he truly believed this is Nathan of Gaza is not a fraudster. He is not someone who is trying to perpetrate a fraud. He is someone who truly believes that he was certainly seeking prophecy, but he believes he got it, and he believes he understands from this moment that Shabbatai Tzvi is in fact the Mashiach. Um, okay. Um, Catching up on my notes, making sure I've got everything here as we need. Okay. Um, Now, Gershon Sholem likes to say that Nathan of Gaza was at once John the Baptist and Paul the prophet of the new Messiah. He's John the Baptist in the sense that people come to him for all sorts of tikkunim, right? They come to him to fix various problems. And he's also the prophet of the new Messiah because now he has seen Shabbatai Tzvi as the Mashiach, and he's going to soon announce him as the Mashiach. Now, this is a perfect storm because Shabbatai Tzvi now has these reports of these various people who went to meet Nathan of Gaza, who was doing all of these tikkunim, telling people how to do penances, fix certain problems, right? So Shabbatai Tzvi is going to go visit Nathan of Gaza, and here's Nathan of Gaza who got this prophetic vision of Shabbatai Tzvi. And in fact, the two of them meet. Sorry, my slides are out of order. I was traveling all day, and so Rafal Yosef sent Shmuel Gondor to investigate Nathan. And now comes Shavuot 1665. Shavuot 1665 is when we now have Shabbatai Tzvi meets Nathan of Gaza. Nathan of Gaza told Shabbatai Tzvi essentially comes to him and says, "Look, I'm having all of these moments of melancholy. Maybe he admitted his moments of elation, and um, and you have to fix me. Give me a tikkun." And the Nathan of Gaza, of course, says, "You don't need a tikkun. You're Mashiach." And of course, Shabbatai Tzvi says, "No, I'm not Mashiach. You've got me mixed up with someone else." Very much like Moshe Rabbeinu. Says, Aaron should be that person. But Nathan of Gaza is not to be put off. He has had a very clear prophetic vision, and um, and he goes into a trance on Shavuot in 1665, and he proclaims publicly to everyone around him on Shavuot. There are even distinguished scholars. The Rosh Yeshiva of Hebron is present. Um, Rabbi Meir ben Yichya Rofi, the Rosh Yeshiva of Hebron, is there, and he sees Nathan go into this trance, and Nathan goes into this ecstatic sort of dancing that the fact that there's Mashiach, he takes off his clothing as it was described in certain places in the Bible. When Shaul, for example, joins the students of Shmuel in prophecy, there he sort of a sort of you don't know what your body is doing. There's some in the sense you're overtaken. And Nathan is in that overtaken state, and he reveals Sabbatai Tzvi to be Mashiach. And then over the course of the next couple of days, um, it, 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 it he needs to convince Sabbatai that in fact he is Mashiach. And Sabbatai also sort of denies it. He falls into this maybe epileptic sort of a moment. And when he wakes up on the 17th of Sivan, he is reciting this verse. Again, a verse from Hosea. But for us, this is going to be a bit of a it's a sharp verse, it's a stinging verse, because there is a tremendous overlay with a, a Christian interpretation. This verse, the Christians are going to read in very messianic terms. They're going to, or I should say, their sense of the death of Jesus and the resurrection of Jesus are, in the Christian interpretation, imprinted onto this verse. This is certainly not how Jews read the verse. The Jews do not read this verse as as having anything to do with resurrection. That is a pure Christian interpretation. But Sabbatai Tzvi, now in sort of this, maybe he was in melancholy, maybe in some kind of possessed state for 3 days. After 3 days, he gets up and he recites this verse: Yechayenu mi yomayim bayom hashlishi. Right? In 2 days, God will make us whole again. And on the third day, raise up, v'nichya lefanav, and we will have God's favor will make us whole. We're going to live in front of God. Right? So this, for Shabtai, this is perfect. Right? In other words, this is him recognizing his messianic status. And now you have Shabbatai Tzvi and Nathan of Gaza, and everybody believes that they are the two of them Mashiach. Now, just one other little piece of background in terms of messianism. Rambam has a very political idea of Mashiach. I don't know if we covered this yet in this particular series, but Maimonides quotes the Talmudic Amora Shmuel. It says, "Ein bein olam hazev yimot haMashiach ela shibud malchiot bilvad." The only difference between Messianic times and our times is the subjugation of our enemies, the anti-Semites. So, one day when Hamas decides that it needs to have a future and work on economic development, and Hezbollah realizes that they don't want Lebanon to be a failed state, and the PLO decides that really it wants to it be the Society for the Advancement of the Palestinian Cause and partnership with the Jewish people is really good for that. And Erdogan in Turkey says, you know what? I share a Mediterranean coastline with Israel, and we really need to build up the Middle East because we need to have our economic zone compete with China and the United States, and we really want to have a real competitive zone. So we're going to have a Middle Eastern free trade market, and so we're going to make a whole. We're going to have a warm and loving relationship with Israel and the Jews, and we're going to make money together. And so now all the haters of the Jews become lovers of the Jews, and that's for Rambam, that's Mashiach. Now I know some people might think that that's more miraculous than turning water to wine or taking water from a stone or any of the miracle stories that you hear around there. But the bottom line is, Maimonides says that the Messiah is not going to need to do any miracles. There's no miracle proofs. So Shabbatai Tzvi, we just declared him Mashiach, and we declared him Mashiach without him. He does not need to do any miracles for us. This is not a requirement of the Mashiach, according to Nathan of Gaza, right? And again, one of the things that Matt Goldish is going to say is that he thinks that one of the geniuses of Nathan of Gaza is that at this time period, the way people see veracity of things is by being able to establish them in ancient sources. And because Nathan of Gaza knows Midrash, Talmud by heart, Maimonides by heart, because he has such a command of the sources, he's very good, and we will see that throughout the story of Nathan of Gaza and Sabbatai Tzvi, without the brilliant mind of Nathan of Gaza to substantiate this, you're going to get nowhere. That no one is going to believe you. But because Nathan of Gaza can source it, can give you interpretations, can give you all of these things, maybe first and foremost among them is he says, this you question that he's Mashiach. Don't question that he's Mashiach. He does not need to give you a miracle. Now, here's where, again, we're going to see here there's an overlapping of Christian doctrine. Now, it may not be pure Christian doctrine, but maybe some of these things seep into the woodwork without being noticed. And I just note that Nathan of Gaza came from an Ashkenazi family. So, you might make the argument, well, look, if he came from a Baghdadi family, maybe he didn't have enough exposure to Christianity to take all this in. But he certainly, the Anusim came from Spain. His family name was Ashkenazi. They had some contact with the Christian world. So here's how this sort of flips. The Mashiach does not need to do actions. And what is required of the followers of Mashiach? What is required of the followers of Mashiach is faith in the Mashiach. The most important thing is going to be your belief in Mashiach. This is a very odd thing for Jews because for Jews, we are a very action-focused religion. It is Christianity that is faith over action. Judaism is action over faith. And so you sort of see a bit of a Christian underpinning to this whole picture. The um, the the other elements of the story to take stock of at this moment are, remember, I told you that the head of the Hebron Yeshiva was there. I told you that there were Kabbalists from Cairo who came to check him out on behalf of the most important Jew in Egypt. You're getting people of very high credentials and respect, right? Generally speaking, if you know that someone that you respect likes a book, you may open up the book and not really find it so magical, but you're willing to give it more time because somebody you respect likes it. Well, same here with this Mashiach. Look, the Rosh Yeshiva of Hebron thinks he's Mashiach. Who am I to say differently? Right? The governor of the Jews in Cairo thinks he's Mashiach. Who am I to say differently? So a lot of people get caught up. And Nathan of Gaza, he's the best guy in the yeshiva. He's smarter than anybody else out there. So people are starting to believe. And the ground again was fertile for this because people had been through the tragedies of Khmelnytsky. They had been the tragedies of the expulsion from Spain. And now they're ready for Mashiach. And all you have to do is believe. And so what does Sabbatai do next? Sabbatai and 12 rabbis go to bring a carbon on the Temple Mount. And the Jerusalem rabbis go crazy. Crazy, right? Now, here's where the Jerusalem rabbis remain the single most sober group in this entire story. Because the Jerusalem rabbis, they actually tore Kriya over this. And they sent Shabtai a letter that says that you are trying to destroy Israel by bringing such a carbon. Because this is a Muslim holy place. Now, we as modern Zionists who now have control of the land of Israel, this is something which is very, very challenging for us, right? Because we know that that's our Temple Mount and that they built their structure on our Temple Mount. It was already taken. Why did you have to put your temple there? And if you've participated in my classes on Islam Comes to Jerusalem, we had a whole discussion about that subject, but that's not tonight's subject. Tonight's subject is on the question of Sabbatai Tzvi. And the truth back then was the Ottomans were a power, and they had the wherewithal to eliminate the Jewish community if they wanted to. And somebody getting up saying he's Mashiach, threatening to rebuild the Beit HaMikdash, which is effectively what bring a carbon up there is a very dangerous thing. And it's also a very dangerous thing to do it on your own without the approval of all the other Jews. Don't you and your 12 rabbi friends go and risk all the rest of around here. I think we could have some similar opinions about certain ministers of the government of Israel who, on their own, without informing the rest of the government, without the imprimatur of democracy, say, I'm going up to the Temple Mount to pray. Now, this is not a statement about whether or not it's right or wrong to pray on the Temple Mount. That has its own set of debates, both halachic and political. But what I would say is you don't do it as a rogue, right? You don't do it as a way where the rest of the world can interpret it one way and everybody else has to pay the price. And that's what was happening with Sabbatai Tzvi. And so the Jerusalem rabbis tear Kriya and they try to have him killed. They denounce.
Rabbi, a quick question, if I may?
Yes,
You use that term a couple of times, ter kriya. Can you just explain what that term means?
that is tearing Kriya is the rending of garments. What
Yeah.
we would do when you lose a relative, right?
Uh-huh.
When you lose a relative, you tear a garment and um, you show your grief. When you hear someone blaspheme in public, you're meant to also tear your garments. You rend your garments, an act of public mourning. So this was what they did. They tore their garments as an act of public mourning.
All right. And one more quick question. So, did he actually go and bring a carbon on the Temple Mount?
So I think they managed to stop him, and his response was, "I was so close." Um,
But like where would he have actually done it? There's no, we don't have an altar up there right now.
in the mosque.
okay, so maybe he would have done it on the mount. I don't know, where he would have burnt them. Maybe he would have built an impromptu one. You know, people like this tend not to get stuck on technicalities.
Okay.
But, like I think I get that you want that detail of the story. We don't have that detail of the story, but it's a, it's what you're seeing someone who is now um, plunging full force and believing in his messianic moment. And that's a very dangerous sort of a thing. Um,
Yeah.
Now, just as one other piece of the puzzle is it, the way that it's sort of odd that you have two guys together in the middle of Gaza decide that the other is Mashiach and away we go, right? Like, when I was growing up, there was a saying that says, "You and what army?" Right? How are you going to convince me? So here, the um, here the question is a little different. Maimonides' Mashiach needs an army, right? Because he's going to be the king of Israel. He's going to bring the Jews to a state of freedom where they're no longer under the oppression of anti-Semites, right? They're going to live in a full political reality, right? So they need to have an army. But Nathan of Gaza is brilliant, right? And he says he will go out to war without hands. This is the perversion of the Lurianic concept. The Lurianic concept, that concept of the Ari, was that the spiritual war is not something you see, right? The action of the war is not, we're not using cannons and muskets and swords and spears. How are we waging war? We're waging war against the Yetzer Hara. We're waging war by shaking our lulav in a particular way. We're waging war by certain kinds of fasts. We may be waging a war by certain kinds of the recitation of certain kinds of prayers, right? So this Mashiach is going to win this war without weapons. He literally, the quote is, he will go forth to war without hands. It's an entirely different concept of a Mashiach, right? That Shabbatai Tzvi is able to change things to the foundation of creation. If that's the case, then he does not need swords. He does not need an army. But at the same time, you're going to have this sort of popular uprising. We're going to need all sorts of other things. And so, as I told you, the rabbis denounce him. We're going to see a couple testimonies of this. The rabbis denounce him to the Qadi, and the Qadi dismisses him. And the people understand this as miraculous. Here, let me see if I have the right quote. Yeah, okay. This is from the Dutch chaplain in Smyrna, and he collects he gives us the way in which the believers understood the events in Jerusalem when the Jerusalem rabbis tried to have Shabbatai Tzvi um, uh, eliminated. After the king entered the house of the Qadi, the king being Shabbatai Tzvi, and did not find him in his chamber, Shabbatai sat on the chair of the Qadi. When the Qadi entered his room, Shabbatai did not even rise to honor the judge. What is more, out of disdain, he even stepped with his foot on the Qadi's cloak. And more, when this hero spoke and pronounced words with his lips, flame shot from his mouth and almost set the Qadi's beard afire, as well as the whole room. Finally, a pillar of fire descended between him and the Qadi. The Qadi was frightened out of alarm, was forced to call to his people who were with him, "Take this man away from me, for I tremble with fear." And some say even added, "This is no man, but an angel." Right? So this is how the followers are talking about him. Nathan of Gaza is saying, "You don't need a miracle." And the people are saying, "Look, what a miracle." Right? So you can see the tension that is coming, because Nathan of Gaza is this brilliant thinker working within the Lurianic Kabbalistic systems. He doesn't need weapons. He's fighting spiritually, and the people are like, he's a magical Mashiach. And um, again, these are they're Leib Ben Ozer is another one of the great texts. He sort of has a diary of what takes place during the time of Shabbatai Tzvi, and he talks about the fact that people all over the Ottoman Empire started to, out of nowhere, prophesy about Shabbatai Tzvi. And the descriptions of what was happening here is profound, because if you look in the middle, it says there were women and men, youths and maidens, even young children, all of whom prophesied in Hebrew or the language of the Zohar, but none of whom knew a single letter of Hebrew, and certainly not Zoharic Aramaic. So I'm going to pick on the person who asked me what Kriya is, Des, right? So, Des, if I asked you to give me a sentence in Zoharic Aramaic, could you?
No, no,
Right.
wouldn't.
You find it a little hard, right? Right?
I wouldn't know where to begin. Yeah.
So if one day in the middle of Kiddush, and no, better yet, in the middle of Rabbi Berger's 2020, Des Friedland opens his mouth and starts saying about in Zoharic Aramaic how Shabbatai Tzvi is Melech HaMashiach while being afflicted with epilepsy, foaming in the mouth and twitching at the same time, people would say, "Whoa, wow, okay, something was going on there." And I don't know what it was, but it seemed like prophecy, right? So
They'll call an
reportedly,
ambulance.
what's that?
They'll
Call
call an ambulance.
Well,
Ambulance will call. Ambulance.
one more time, Annie.
They will call an ambulance.
They call an ambulance. They will call an ambulance. And but if he woke up seconds later, right, and said Shabbatai Tzvi is the Mashiach, maybe not. Maybe we don't need the ambulance at that point. So you get these stories that are going on all over the place. And here's just another account, talks about people from all over the place would spontaneously prophesy that Shabbatai Tzvi is the Mashiach. So you're getting these stories all over the place, and you have Shabbatai Tzvi. Now, um, I want to go back to this moment in Jerusalem, right, where there's other versions of the story. Let me just tell you one other version of the story that's uh, about how they tried to get rid of Sabbatai Tzvi. They tried to get rid of Sabbatai Tzvi because they said he was stealing the money from the poor. And they figured, they could buy off the Turkish judge, and the Turkish judge would execute him because they could bribe him. Turns out this was an honest Turkish judge, so they couldn't bribe him. So Sabbatai Tzvi got away, but his followers still said it's a miracle. And what does Sabbatai Tzvi do after that? According to at least one tradition, he goes and walks around Jerusalem on a white horse, wearing a green sash, a green hood. Right? Now, I know what you're thinking. Like when you think Green Hood, what do you think?
Ku Klux Klan.
Another anti-Semite.
Mhm.
You're thinking Hood. Think green.
Green.
Hamas.
Thank you. Annie, I couldn't believe you didn't get that. Okay, yes, Hamas, they were green. So it turns out that is green is in Islam is the color of paradise.
I'm in, I'm in the 16th century. It's hard to talk about today.
But the color schemes don't change. So the green, Islam's green is the color of paradise.
Yeah.
So he's wearing a green hood is the color of paradise. Again, let's not forget that Shabbatai Tzvi has a penchant for Islam. We've already seen that in a couple of different ways. And the white horse, Jews are not allowed to ride horses according to the Pact of Umar, right? Jews cannot ride horses. Muslims can ride horses, but not Jews, right? You can't. It would be wrong for a Jew to walk around with a horse when Muslims can't afford one. But they allow him to do this. And who's going to walk in on a white steed? What's the tradition? Mashiach is walking in on a white steed. And so here, the legend of what the Jew who walked around the Muslim
Sorry,
city.
Rabbi. I'm sorry to interrupt. Jews can't ride horses?
No.
Okay, the Pact of Umar, Jews can ride horses. It's not halacha. The Pact of Umar was a um, an edict of Islam that allowed Jews to live relatively protected in Muslim lands, but there are certain rules that they have to abide. They have to be subservient in certain ways. And so one of the rules, I believe, maybe it was not always observed, maybe it was observed in the breach, maybe it was looked the other way if you were rich enough, but one of the rules, I believe, was that you were not allowed to ride on a horse. And Gershon Sholem does say that that was how things were observed in Jerusalem. In Jerusalem, you were not allowed to do that. Rami wrote in the chat that Jews must dismount when coming across a Muslim person. Might have been another way that worked. But either way, right, you can appreciate that here this Jew riding on a white steed in the middle of Yerushalayim, wearing a green hood or green sash of some sort, which is the symbol of Muslim paradise, is going to be a spectacle. It's going to, in of itself, be seen as a miracle, right? Susan, I don't know what that link you put in is, but I imagine it's the Pact of Umar or Jews riding horses. But okay.
Another way that rule manifested itself is that throughout Muslim Europe, synagogues could never be built taller than their mosques.
Right, but that was the Christian anti-Semitism's iteration of it, right?
No,
That,
during
that was
In Muslim Europe, they couldn't build
you
them taller
mean,
than the
oh,
mosques.
so you mean Muslim Spain?
Right? Yeah, exactly.
Okay, yes, that would be another part of it. And what Susan put in there, I think maybe it was a Google search for dhimmi. Dhimmi is the term for someone who is not a heretic under Islam, but is a people of the book. But let's stay focused on the Shabtai Tzvi part of this. Shabtai Tzvi part of this is right. The Jerusalem rabbis there's a concept called Ein Navi Be'iro. You can't be a prophet in your own town. They knew this guy. He was this is the Meshuggah, right? This is the Meshuggah guy who we had to flog because he's Meshuggah. And, he used to pronounce the name of God out loud and all sorts of weird stuff. And he married a Sefer Torah and, they kicked him out of Saloniki. And this is a weird dude. And the guys and the rabbis in Jerusalem are not taken by him at all, right? And they put him in Cherem. And he does other weird things. He gets up and he has a whole group of his followers eat the fat of the kidney, which is called chalev. And this is a unique sort of prohibition in the Torah, because most of the prohibitions of the Torah that come with excommunication, you're giving into your desires. So typically the incest taboos and various sexual offenses have the pain of karet, of excommunication. So here Sabbatai Tzvi he gets up and he's doing what was called Aveira Lishma. He's doing a sin on purpose, but he's trying to say, I'm not giving into lust. This is going to be me fighting the spiritual war, right? I'm going to do this strange deed. And he uses that blessing that we saw from last week, Baruch Ata Hashem Matir Asurim, right? Isurim, God who permits the forbidden. And here, Nathan of Gaza's genius is going to be, he's going to interpret this, that there are aspects of klipa, there are aspects of evil in the Lurianic system that need to have their fixing. And here, our mystical Messiah is here to do that. You have this perfect pairing. You have this charismatic but odd person who's doing these strange acts, who's now willing in his manic mode to believe that he's Mashiach. And you have a very sharp, smart, and pious Nathan of Gaza who's going to write letters all over. And at the same time, you have the evidence we have is that the communities of Hebron and the community of Gaza were all taken by Sabbatai Tzvi. Jerusalem was skeptical. Jerusalem was putting him in Cherem. Jerusalem rabbis were like, this guy's a fake. He is not Mashiach. And he's dangerous. And he's going to kill us all. And you have Gaza and Hebron who are smitten by him. And we have a powerful Jew in Cairo. And letters are going to start to go out. And the world is ready for Mashiach. And so these letters are going out. And we have these stories of prophecy. And it's sort of a viral phenomenon. It feeds on each other. Almost like a run on tulips, right? And we're going to see right now that the fervor for Sabbatai Tzvi the Mashiach is burning greatly. Okay, I think all right. So we end where we began. Sabbatai Tzvi, the man, the myth, and the impact. Where we've gotten to this week is Sabbatai Tzvi now believes he's Mashiach. He now also has a prophet. Nathan of Gaza will be the messianic prophet, and it is Nathan of Gaza's brilliance and his pen and his energetic skill and his eloquence as a writer to interpret Sabbatai Tzvi that are going to make this movement start to take off, and it takes off like wildfire. Next week, we are not on because there's a program at the same time. And then I hope in our next session about Sabbatai Tzvi, we're going to look at the other influences that are starting to pump this up, how it spreads in other ways. Part of what I think is important to understand in this story, maybe one of the lessons to conclude from it, is that Judaism is a religion that demands skepticism. And actually, I have a source on that unfortunately, the Rashba, Rabbi Shimon ben Aderet, writes in a tshuva about an earlier false Messiah. He says, Jews need to be skeptical. They need to be cynical about these things until you have full proof. Expect it is all not true until you have a proof. And what the Rashba says is, you see, the Jews were cynical about Moses. They demanded this of him. They demanded that of him. Their cynicism was well placed, he says. And the reason is that when you jump from the explanations, the interpretations of the Lurianic system to a full-blown jump into prophecy and messianism, you get into real trouble. You guys haven't even seen the trouble we're in yet. Because we haven't finished the Sabbatai Tzvi story, right? He now thinks he's the Mashiach. This is a movement which is catching on, which if you remember last week I showed you that one of Sabbatai Tzvi's opponents, Rabbi Yaakov Saspertas, said that in Amsterdam, if you said a word against the Mashiach, you were going to be, you were afraid for your life. And this week I told you that one of the most important things was to be a believer. The Sabbateans never called themselves Sabbateans. They always called themselves believers. And they thought that one of the most important qualities was belief. So the need for other people to believe is going to fuel this fire, and this fire will rage out of control. And it will be one of those fires that is hard to put out. So I'm leaving you a little bit as the pendulum slings toward the worst, but we will carry this story through to its end. Annie.
Yes. I know that one of the 13 principles of Rambam is the belief in Mashiach, a person. But I have huge difficulty and discomfort the two times that there was sort of a Mashiach, even though the first one is not our Mashiach, it's a Christian Mashiach, but the second one is, well, false, mind you, but still Mashiach, gets all in trouble. So I don't have a problem with the Messianic era concept, Yemei Mashiach, but I have a huge discomfort with the idea of a person Mashiach.
Okay, well, here, what if I were to say something completely crazy to you? And if I were to say to you, look, that if I told you that the fact that the Jews in a post-Holocaust world are able to govern themselves, and they have a prime minister who can represent them to the world. And while we don't have a king, we do have someone who has been anointed by the votes of the Jewish people. And that we might want to call him the anointed one, for lack of a better term. Would you be offended by the idea that we have returned to sovereignty, that there's such a thing as a Mashiach, as someone who is vested as the chief executive of the Jewish people?
No, I will not have that. I will not have a problem. The way you put it is completely reasonable.
Well, that's how
But
Rambam puts it. More or less, that's Rambam's version. And the fact that it got perverted,
sorry, go ahead.
and hang that on Rambam, right?
Yeah, perhaps because it's such an important part of his 13 principles.
I'll say, let me say it like this, right? This is a bit of a crude kind of a thing, but like, artificial intelligence is a very good thing, right? We can agree with that, right? But the fact that 6 months ago, the New York Times talked about how school districts don't know how to handle artificial intelligence when the young male classmates of their female friends post inappropriate pictures that are generated by AI with their classmates' faces on them and put them on the internet. And how are you supposed to deal with that legally? Well, is that the problem of AI? That there's somebody who used it horribly, right? So you can see that there are things in the world that have a very positive dimension that someone can totally pervert. So that that's something that we have to look at maybe a little bit differently. But with that, I guess we'll end tonight.